everybody. Thanks for joining us here on Investex, where we talk about everything business, financial, and investments related specifically to Texas. Today, we got a very interesting topic. We're going to be talking about border policies and how it affects Texas, and specifically a violent gang called Tren De Araguas. I hope I'm saying that right. So have you heard about this?
I haven't heard about it. I think you're gonna be living in Iraq if you haven't. Man, yeah, this has kind of been headline news, I think, for the past couple months. This has been something that's been definitely promoted heavily from certain political candidates and campaigns, but this is definitely something that's become a concern. And so you and I are based here in Houston, and for us being in Texas. I mean, you read the articles and you see it and you think this is crazy. But I guess it hits more home when this starts to become closer to home. And so I know we're going to lead into this and talk about this, right? But, you're now seeing the emergence of this particular group show up in San Antonio. And I mean, that's just a couple hours west of where we are, right? So that, I mean, this is knocking on our next door neighbor's house. So this is some scary stuff, man. This is something really I'm looking forward to kind of diving into and talking about.
So, if you haven't heard of this, I'm reading here weeks after reports came of a giant gathering in a parking lot with Venezuelan flags flying, apartment complexes in Aurora, Colorado, owned by the same company, one called Whispering Pines, started to be forcefully taken over by a Venezuelan gang called Tren De Aragua. The property management filed a police report that stated he was punched around 20 times. They basically broke in and started taking empty apartments and then started extorting tenants and basically squatting. And now the police report, as well as the mayor, Mike Kaufman, are having conflicting reports saying they're not gang related. But on the other hand, down in Texas, immediately Governor Abbott was their tier one. Moving into Texas, San Antonio police officer confirmed Venezuelan Tren De Aragua gang occupied vacant apartments, and Governor Greg Abbott is declaring the gang a foreign terrorist in September.
Yeah, yeah. This again, man. This is pretty scary stuff. I mean, and going back to your comment about Colorado, this is a certain group of non-US citizens that have penetrated a community in Colorado that came over and started hostily taking over these apartment communities, right? And so, people that both lived in the communities from the residents were starting to get very fearful for their personal homes and spaces. The property managers basically had no control, and as you mentioned, were victims of violence and threats and such like that. And ultimately, this group has taken over full control over these communities. And so, and the fact that that has now started to occur here in San Antonio in Texas is, I mean, it's kind of mind-boggling, to be honest with you. Like the idea of this happening in America, to me, it just seems so bizarre to me, right? I mean, this is United States of America. Nobody messes with the United States, right? And here they are. I mean, they're basically a bully coming in, punching you in the mouth, and nothing's being done about it. So yeah, I'll tell you this, I'm thankful to be in a state like Texas where we have a very proactive government and leadership at the state level that's jumping on this quickly. And I do hope that we can keep this issue contained and ultimately get rid of it because, like I said, the amount of lives and people this affects is significant.
Yeah, it's crazy to go between the two accounts from Aurora, Colorado, different kind of state policies, and the kind of reason for hiding that it's not gang related when the citizens are obviously saying it's gang related or group related.
Yeah. Well, we live in a world right now that's so sensitive and it's so politically charged that everything has to be so politically correct. And I agree with you. I think the idea that we can't call it what it is pretty baffling as well. But regardless of what you want to label it, whatever you want to use to describe this particular group, the fact that U.S. citizens are being threatened and their livelihoods are being threatened is is a problem. No way to say it. So we need some direct leadership in there to kind of help really mitigate the situation because this is going to have some big impacts.
And this gang specifically, I don't know if you remember the mass exodus from Venezuela, a whole group coming up, but it was around the area where the highest murder rates in the world were. So
Mm.
year after year. And I mean, I think this gang gained notoriety in the last 10 years for being one of the most violent gangs in that area.
Yeah,
And just
yeah.
recently, the reports are saying in the San Antonio apartments. Now, one article from the Texan, it says the Texas Department of Public Safety announced the arrest of one TDA member in Houston. Now they're in Houston. And a 32-year-old illegal alien from Venezuela, now at custody, allegedly recruiting middle school students for the TDA.
You said that's here in Houston?
Yeah.
Yeah. See, that's the problem is I think what a lot of people don't really pay attention to is like these little clusters and I say little, I mean just one of these members of this group is more than we should have. But the fact that there's these clusters now forming in our cities, it starts to spread like a virus. Like once they're here, once they penetrate the system in which they are able to continue to, like you said, recruit new people to this gang or bring in new people, um, it's an open floodgate, and we have to cut that off, right? I mean, it's no secret we've had looser uh, policy on the border, and we've seen a high influx of non-citizens into the United States here over the last administration. So um, my fear is like, is this cluster of gang members, where are they that we don't know, right? Where are they all of a sudden going to start penetrating and becoming, I guess more visible in the communities? And that to me is a concern. I mean, this is the first I'm hearing that it's actually even starting to show up here in Houston. I mean, um, it's pretty disappointing.
Yeah. And whatever this says about border policy, I know it's all bad, the fact that we have gang related activity, especially a violent gang, coming in and recruiting. But what does that say about Texas and Aurora and the U.S. investments in general? What does that do? Not only are they taking and squatting, but that
Yeah.
could drive down prices.
Well, sure. I mean, like you and I both own properties, right? We own commercial properties across Texas and other markets, right? And so I think of this from a property owner and the position that we're in. If I have a property where I have attached my name to on the debt and I'm paying a lender on for a loan on a property, I have to make sure that that property is running and operating and executing efficiently so I can generate the revenue and income I need to pay for the debt, right? So take a situation like in San Antonio where, or Aurora, where now all of a sudden this gang comes in and takes over this community, presuming they don't pay rent, presuming they don't pay any type of living expenses to stay there. Well, what happens? My revenue dries up as the property owner. I can no longer afford to pay the expenses of operating that building and that community, and I can no longer pay my debt. So now I'm liable for the debt in which my name's attached to. I've got residents in these communities that are they're going to be forced out or they're going to move out voluntarily because they don't want to be living in a community like that. And so I have a potential to basically default on these properties. Not to mention the negative attention it brings as far as crime and things like that in that particular area, which affects things like insurances, it affects things like your community stats in the community around it. So, you know, So it definitely has a ripple effect for people that own like real estate, like us, again, for example, across Texas. And it could be a very big problem for us if that just so happens to happen at one of your properties, you know? And I don't know. I mean, I've never been faced with a situation, but I can't imagine the lender's just going to be sympathetic to that scenario right at the gate. You would hope they would be, but I mean, let's face it, there's nothing in the loan agreement that has anything to protect you from a hostile takeover from a foreign group, so to speak. So, ultimately, you're the one that's bearing all the risk financially if that happens to
You just start adding a new insurance policy, I guess.
you. Oh man, can you imagine being an underwriter for that and writing that into the language of the?
How accurate is it for a gang to take over my apartment complex? We'll see. But as far as the Venezuelan economic collapse leading to the mass exodus of like 8 million Venezuelans to different countries in different parts of the world, Biden's administration is actually designating Tren De Aragua as a transnational criminal organization on par with groups like MS-13. And Greg Abbott in September said they were tier one threat. That just goes to enforce how severe this threat is to the communities around.
Yeah. And rightfully so. I mean, these are very violent members of this particular organization, and they have no respect at all for both the laws and governments in their home countries in Venezuela, much less here in America. The fact that they've made it here to the United States with very little resistance would basically be conducive to that behavior. Why would they respect our laws and our ways here, given the type of organization they are? So I think it's rightfully so that they get labeled as such by state and federal governments. But that's not enough. I mean, we can label them whatever all day long, but we really need, we need an action from our law enforcement. We need these people removed from our communities. We need these people detained and excommunicated back to wherever they came from, and so that way we can keep our communities safe. And I think that's the big concern that a lot of Americans share across, not just here in Texas, but across the United States as a whole is, do you feel safer today than you did a few years ago? And I mean, arguably, I would say not really. I've got a father of three kids, granddaughter, and you know, I think about it every single day that they're not home in my sight. What's happening out in our communities and whatnot. So I think a lot of people have a concern about this trend and this penetration that we're seeing from this organization.
I mean, this goes even into increasing security. What do you think Texas would be doing to prevent this? What can Texas do with these new policies put in place?
Well, if you look at Texas's stance and the use of like the National Guard, for example, along the southern border to help fight against the flow of non-citizens into the United States, despite the federal government's position on their border policy, right? You had the Texas state government that really stepped up and said, no, we're going to be proactive in doing our part in ensuring that we're protecting our borders so we can protect our communities, right? So that was, again, enacting the Texas National Guard and putting up, fences and other protective measures along the southern border to deter people from wanting to come in illegally without resistance, right? And so I think Texas, unfortunately, is a very proactive state in recognizing that and saying, "Hey, no, we're going to take and employ every resource and intervention at our disposal to combat this trend, so that way this doesn't become a bigger problem." But it's it's sad that it becomes a state versus federal issue as well, because Texas can only do so much without violating federal law. And this is where policies or politics come into play, right? Where you have the Texas state governor who's battling against the current administration to protect itself and its citizens, but then the federal government saying, no, we have this border policy that basically has certain guidelines and restrictions for how to treat non-citizens coming in. And so Short answer is, look, I honestly don't know what the state can do other than utilizing its law enforcement resources that we do have to control and contain what we have in our communities now. But this needs to be intervention at the federal level to really step in and start tightening up their border policy so that way we can really get this under control.
And going back to this article where it says property management got beat and punched around 20 times. I mean, what are you doing where you're getting a random gang beating you? How do you protect yourself against that? I don't even know what security could do.
Yeah, I mean, what do you do? I mean, it's not like these property managers are carrying any type of, weapons on them to protect themselves, right? I mean,
Well, maybe in Texas.
maybe in Texas,
Definitely
yeah.
not in Aurora.
I mean, I might want to start employing my property manager, start packing, after this trip. But yeah, I mean, what do? You just fight for your life and pray to God that you make it out. And then, I mean, put yourself in that position. If you're a property manager at a community and you just got the tar beat out of you, are you going to want to go back to work next week? Probably not. That's probably the end of your property management career, right? And that's the other impact here is what property manager or property management company is going to want to go and provide their services in a community that has that type of risk? Nobody. And as an owner, I don't want to put my staff in that situation either, right? So it's yeah, man, it's a slippery slope for sure, and I feel for that victim of that. I mean, that's a horrible situation, but I mean, that's just one of so many instances that we've seen in the headlines over the last couple of years, and I don't know that's what concerns me about this being so close to home is like, again, we got properties here in Texas. If that happens at one of our communities, what do you do?
Yeah.
I mean, what's the response? And I mean, it's just it's hard to imagine that that's now something that we have to take into account here in Texas. So
Yeah, and I talking about going back to work, I know we've both been nurses and we've gone through nothing comparatively to getting beaten at work, but I mean, I've gotten human feces thrown at me. So going back into work the next day was a drag for sure. So I couldn't imagine getting beat at work.
I knew I smelt a stench on you when we were hanging out the other day. I thought it makes sense now.
It happens most days.
Yeah, yeah, most days. No, but you're right, man. It is very demeaning, right? It's very it makes you question a lot about what you're doing. And let's be honest, I mean, people in property management specifically, it's a thankless job, man. It's tough as itself, just having to deal with residents and collecting rent and property owners that are breathing down their neck and such. And then now you take into account that they have to worry about whether they're going to get harassed or violently assaulted every day they go to work. Like, yeah, I call in to and quit on you in a heartbeat if that's me. So it's something that I think we got to really, really draw attention to and continue to keep the light on until this gets fixed.
And I think that does it for us today on Investex. Again, thank you for joining us. And if you want any access to future videos or content or want to talk to us, feel free to reach out to us in the link below. And if you enjoyed today's conversation and you want to hear the next conversation, feel free to click the link right above. We will see you next week.